The Uncle Gold Podcast. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Uncle Gold Podcast. My name is Borna Zuber, I'm the host of the show, and I'm glad that you're back. Today we have my friend Brendan Caulfield again here at the podcast. We did one podcast already a few weeks back, and if you missed that one, I highly encourage you to have a listen to it or watch it on the YouTube channel, because we went deep into Tesla, self-driving cars, AI, electric vehicles, and topics like that I think that are very interesting at the moment, and also are shaping the culture of today, because as you probably noticed, you can see more and more Teslas and electric cars on the streets. So it's something that's coming our way anyways, and it's better to be informed about it than not. Also, for everyone who doesn't like this long form podcasts, there's a third channel that I run. It's called Uncle Gold Podcast Clips, where you have the short form sound bites of just like a few minutes of the most important topics, where we go through like in 5 minutes over the most important parts. And Brendan, welcome to the Uncle Gold Podcast.
Thanks very much, Borna. Great to be back.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you here, man. I was looking forward to this chat with you again, because last time we went over an hour, but we had some technical difficulties, and it kind of made the whole process shorter, and we didn't get the chance to go into all of the topics that we were thinking about doing and talking about. So let's hope that this time everything works.
Yeah, exactly.
How have you been since the last time? How's lockdown? How's your family? How's everything?
Oh, grand. No horror stories or anything. Just been tipping away at figuring out 3D printing and product design. Helped my nephew with a racing bike that he was taking part in a race in, and got it to regulation measurements or whatever. I don't really understand, but like I printed a little 4 centimeter piece that allowed him to compete, which was great. Just working on other stuff like a phone stand for my mom, replacement battery covers. It's brilliant what a 3D printer can do for you. The little things you don't think, and then you go, the little frustrations. You go, I could print something for that.
I listened to a conversation on YouTube recently where people were chatting about like, why didn't 3D printers catch on more with the general public? And the guy said that the main argument was that it's too expensive, and the other guy says that it's actually too complicated. So the price is not that much of a problem, but for a person to figure out where to buy it, what the materials are that you can use, installing the software, and then finding the designs online, they say that it's like too complicated right now.
I would disagree probably with that, because I got this one for under $200. In fact, closer to 100. That was on offer, but I know its regular retail price is now under $200, so that's reasonably affordable. I mean, lots of people buy devices for a lot more than that. Software is extremely straightforward. It all came on the memory stick for this, so there isn't really an issue with that. Finding items to print is simple as a Google search. You just download them, they'd be ready to go. You load them into the software and export them to the card, put it in the machine and hit go. If you want to make your own objects, like all these things I've been printing, it takes a little bit more skill in like 3D design and all that kind of thing, but it's nothing you can't get to grips with reasonably quickly. I think, in my opinion anyway, what is the stumbling block for 3D printers is that I've heard from a lot of friends who have other friends, and they'll say, or other friends with 3D printers, and they'll say, oh yeah, such and such got a 3D printer, and they were really gung-ho about it, and then I'd heard nothing more about it. So it doesn't seem that exciting to me anymore. And I think the reason for that is you really kind of initially underestimate how long it takes to print something. Like this thing that I have made. Sorry for the podcast listeners, but on YouTube you'll be able to see I have a little tricorder from Star Trek. It's still a prototype, but it will one day have flashing lights and so on. But anyway, that case and all the little bits and pieces probably took about 24 hours in total to print. So, and even the holster that I made for it
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that took like 12 hours.
Mm.
So it takes a remarkable amount of time for these things to come out, and
Pretty slow.
you'll look at an object and go, oh, that's fairly simple, and
Mm-hmm.
then it'll take forever to print. So I think that's the frustrating part of it for people. They think that it's like a replicator from Star Trek. You put the file on it and it'll appear. But no, it's a bit slower. That's the only real stumbling block I see.
Do you think that it will get faster with time?
I don't know, to be honest with you. It's kind of a physics problem. There's a few different types of printers. So there's like what I have is called is it finite deposition. I can't remember now. Finite deposition modeling, FDM. Yeah. So it's laying basically a little strip of melted plastic uh, in layers and building it up.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a two-dimensional shape just stacked on top of each other for thousands of layers. Um, that's the basic principle behind most 3D printers, but how they actually do that differs. So there's some that have like a bath of liquid and use UV light to set that. It's a kind of an epoxy liquid that sets under UV light, and they have a screen under the bath, and the screen displays the two-dimensional shape, and then that sets the layer, and then it moves the print up and sort
Mm-hmm.
of prints from the bottom. Um, and then there's ones that use a powder as well, and it's sort of, I think it's melting the powder and pushing the thing up out of the powder bed. So there's various different types of 3D printer, but they all take time. Probably the epoxy bath one is the quickest. Um, so I don't know. It might be a physics constraint as to how quickly you can move around um, this melted stuff because it needs to take time to set on each layer and so on. Um, but yeah, I suppose as with all things, they'll find efficiencies and they'll find new ways to do it. It's
Yeah.
still very early days.
True, true.
Mm.
I think it would get better if like the competition was higher. If like
Yeah,
there are a lot of companies, if more people started buying it, more companies would try to figure out how
mm.
they can make it better, faster, affordable, all of that, and then competition would drive the efficiency to go up.
Yeah.
Let's transition with that into one of our favorite companies that kind of thrives on increasing efficiency and speed and everything. As I said in the intro, we kind of went through Tesla and cars last time. We didn't go too deep into it because of technical difficulties. I'm sure we'll go through some parts again,
Sure.
but let's get into the space part of Tesla, which is SpaceX. There's a for everyone that's just joined this planet. There's a huge space race going on. It's the second one that we as a civilization have. First one was some 50, 60 years ago when we were trying to get to the moon, and the second one is happening right now. So
Yeah.
there are a bunch of companies that are developing vehicles that will take us to space. One of them is SpaceX, where me and Brendan are huge fans. And today we're going to chat a little bit about what's been going on. And I know, Brendan, how much time and effort you spend into following all these launches and staying up late and
Yes.
following people who are following everything and reporting there from the ground and everything. For everyone that's just joining in and listening for the first time and maybe interested in space travel and all of that, can you give us a short intro into what's kind of happening right now, where we're at?
Okay. So, what's the best way to pitch this? I suppose um, a lot of people, I suppose, would have been like me about 10 or 15 years ago, where you're into science fiction, you love, spaceships flying around and having adventures and all that kind of thing, Star Trek, Star Wars, all those kind of things. Um, and real space stuff, launches and satellites and probes, it seems kind of boring by comparison. And you're just not that interested in it. And part of that, I think, was because there didn't seem to be a connection between modern space activity and that future that we're kind of looking at in awe of. And along came SpaceX, and their explicit aim, the whole reason the company has been founded, is to establish a city of 1 million people at least on Mars, to colonize Mars and make it a second home for humanity and life from Earth in general. that to me is mind blowing. And the fact is, they want to do this as quickly as humanly possible. So they're aiming to get people on Mars. The notional aim is 2025, so 5 years from now. It's maybe achievable, but a lot of things would have to go right. And in space, the space industry, that tends to, you know, timelines tend to inflate because of issues. But yeah, so it's this the thing that excites so many people about this company is ambition, vision, and continual results. They have this drive to keep going, and they break boundary after boundary. And it's not just boundaries that other people have broken before, and the industry as a whole has lost interest in. This is brand new achievement. It's absolutely incredible what these guys have done. And because it's so far outside sort of the average person's field of interest or um, experience, it's kind of flying under the radar. Less so lately. They're getting a lot of notice in recent months and years. But man, I've been following this company for 10 years now, and it has just been such a roller coaster ride. So I suppose we should go back to the beginning, talk about how they got started. So everyone's favorite punching bag, Elon Musk, was.
Who is Elon Musk?
Yeah, Elon Musk. He's a South African-born entrepreneur. He, I can't remember what year he was born in, the 70s sometime. I think he's 45 or 49, something like that. Anyway, he was a giant nerd growing up. Going to school, he was beaten up, he was bullied, he was sent to hospital one time because he was pushed down some stairs. But he was super like smart and calculating. He was writing computer games when he was like 9. He tried to set up an arcade business with his brother Kimball at like age 11. And he'd done it all over the phone and like almost negotiated a contract to buy the place. And his parents found out and stopped him. Um, then at age 17, he decided that all of his interest in sort of science fiction, futuristic stuff, there wasn't much scope for it in South Africa at the time, a very troubled country. So he decided that he would try and get to the US, where it seemed like all of the future stuff was happening. And he went to Canada at age 17 with, I think, $2,000 and hung out with some relatives, got a few jobs, including like one where he was cleaning out a grain silo or something that could explode at any moment, just sort of crazy stuff. Fast forward a few years anyway, and he's worked his way up through banks and various jobs, and started a software company with his brother who had moved over. It was called Zip2, I think, and that was the sort of a prototype Yelp.com kind of thing, reviews and maps of various businesses. It was sort of ahead of its time, and ended up being bought by a newspaper and kind of disappearing into their melange. But it was bought by a newspaper, so he had a bit of money. He reinvested that in a series of businesses, leading to most notably a company called X.com. And this was founded out of his desire, as he had gone through education, through various levels of education, he had been thinking about the future of the human race. And in a way that I don't think most people do. He's thinking about it on a kind of an existential level, and what could guarantee the preservation of our species for the rest of time. And he came up with a list of items, and I always forget one or two of these items, but it was like climate change is an existential threat. Being limited to a single planet is an existential threat. Artificial intelligence is an existential threat. Economic meltdown is maybe not an existential threat, but it's a threat to the civilization that enables us to deal with the others. Mm-hmm. And there was another one that I'm forgetting as well.
Probably something like self-destruction through war or something like that.
Yeah.
Virus could be also a thing, as we see in 2020.
Certainly, yeah. So he hasn't tackled either of those two, I don't think, to any kind of extent. But what he has looked at is climate change. Obviously, he started Tesla to try and accelerate the transition to renewable energy usage. Because Tesla isn't just a car company; they do battery storage, solar power, and so on. And we talked a good bit about that in the last one. The single planet species is addressed by SpaceX, but that came later. So what X.com was trying to tackle was the economic side of things, and the lowest hanging fruit of that, the first part that he could see to tackle was the banking industry, and to get into that, he thought he would focus on digitizing payments. And so X.com was all about digitizing payments, making it so you could email money back and forth. And if this is sounding familiar, it's because it got bought out or merged with what became PayPal. And his ambition to upend the banking industry using PayPal led to the board of PayPal voting him out while he was on his honeymoon. So he was away on holiday with his new wife, and they voted him out of the company. But they did give him a golden handshake of something like $150 million. So he was there at like age.
That's basically paying him out to leave the company, right?
Exactly, yeah, because he was just too much of an upstart and was going to upset all of these industries. And he still occasionally talks about wanting to get back into PayPal, like buy PayPal now,
and all the banking industry gets shook up. Like,
yeah,
oh,
exactly.
No, stick to cars and rockets.
Yeah. So so what he was sitting there with money. You said a minute ago that SpaceX was the space part of Tesla. They're actually completely separate companies, but SpaceX is slightly older than Tesla as well. So SpaceX was founded in 2002, and this happened because when he was booted out of PayPal, he was kind of at a loss as to what to do, and he thought back to his list of existential threats, and the whole single planet species thing came up. So the thinking behind that is that we live on this one planet. It's vulnerable to, like you said, viruses, AI takeover, an asteroid hitting it, stars exploding nearby and sending gouts of radiation at us, whatever. So if we can establish a permanent home on another world, that doubles our chances of surviving any of those threats. And more than that, he was a fan of science fiction growing up. He was thinking, where's the moon base? Where's the Mars base? Yeah. So he went on NASA's website and he looked it up, looked at their Mars page, and there was nothing. There was no plan. So he was kind of stunned by this, and he thought, okay, well, it's probably just an issue of the budget for NASA. So what informs the budget? Well, politicians, obviously. What informs politicians? Public will. Well, if I can maybe use some of my riches to excite the public about Mars, it might push NASA towards doing something. So he came up with this idea of, initially he wanted to send mice to Mars, and he started to talk to a few rocket scientists that he could get his hands on, and they reminded him that mice need to eat and dispose of the food after they've eaten. So you needed to do a very complex set of equipment inside the rocket then in order to support that. So mice are maybe a little bit too complex for $150 million to pull off going to Mars. Mm-hmm. $150 million to send anything to Mars is pretty ambitious. But then he decided, well, what about a machine that you can land on Mars and inside a Perspex box with atmosphere and a little bit of soil, you can plant a seed, have a plant grow, and put a webcam showing the plant growing on the surface of Mars, this green on the background of red, and inspire people in that way. So that was the plan. And in shopping around, he found that rockets are very expensive. I was surprised to learn that. And ended up looking at what was at that time, this is 2000 or 2001, around that time frame, the former Soviet Union was sort of getting back up after the collapse of the Soviet Union at this point. But there was a lot of kind of profiteering going on in the Soviet military, or what had been the Soviet military, and lots of hardware being sold off to various dodgy parts of the world.
Entities.
But he got wind of, sorry?
Dodgy entities.
Dodgy entities, yes. Kind of gives you the impression of a glowing cloud. But yeah, so he decided to see if he could take advantage of this, and he went over to Russia with the intention of buying an ICBM and refitting it for interplanetary travel. Tall order at the best of times, but he met with a former Soviet general and their staff and said, "I'd like to buy this rocket. How much do you want for it?" And the Russians were saying, $20 million. You can have this rocket for $20 million. But as the conversation wore on, that price crept up, almost in proportion with the amount of vodka that was being served to the Americans. So it was like, drink vodka and you can have this $30 million rocket. Have more vodka for $40 million rocket, and it just kept creeping up. And when Musk
Russian negotiation tactics.
exactly, when Musk called them on this creeping price increase, the general that they were speaking to spat on him and called him a naive capitalist American. He was at least one of those things was wrong. So anyway, he came away from that, and himself and this gaggle of rocket scientists that he had kind of been gathering up for the last couple of years at this point were flying home. Musk was in the seat in the row ahead of them, and he had been completely quiet since they took off. They thought they were all feeling very defeated and despondent about what had happened. And he had been hunched down in his seat, and then suddenly his head appears over the back of the seat, and he has his laptop in his hand. He goes, "Guys, look at this," and he has a spreadsheet laid out where he has, after absorbing knowledge from these guys for a few months, he has a pretty good idea of what goes into a rocket in terms of materials and design and all of that. And he has a spreadsheet laid out. And what he has been doing for the several hours of the flight up to this point was working out what the actual material and labor costs were to build a rocket. And he had accounted for it all and said, like, this is so much cheaper than any price quote that we have gotten. Why don't we do it ourselves? And that's how SpaceX was born. So they started flying a small rocket called Falcon 1, and by small it was like 15 meters tall or something. Had a payload capacity, which means the amount of stuff it can put into orbit, of about I think was it even 1 ton? Yeah, it was something in that region, possibly smaller than that, 500 kilograms maybe. And they were aiming to fly it from Vandenberg Air Force Base in Northern California. Now, in the US, up to that point, there had been Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and a few other companies that would collaborate to put together rockets for NASA. So Boeing and Lockheed Martin had their own full launch capabilities, which the US Air Force had mandated and were using quite frequently. And there was a lot of dodgy stuff going on between Boeing and Lockheed Martin. So at that time, there had been multiple corporate espionage cases between the two of them, stealing secrets from each other. And it was getting so bad that the US government actually stepped in and said, look, we need launch capability. By rights, we should dissolve both of your companies because you've been so, both of your rocket companies, because you have been so bad to each other. But actually, we're going to push you together and make you kiss and form a new company called United Launch Alliance because we need this capability and we can't have all of this espionage going on anymore. So that company still persists today. It's called ULA, and it is co-owned by both Boeing and Lockheed Martin. Fierce rivals forced to run this company together.
That's kind of a smooth solution to the problem.
It is, yeah. Although it could be seen as well as rewarding bad behavior.
Sure.
So ULA is essentially one company that has a monopoly on the US launch market at this point. And SpaceX comes along with their small rocket, and they set up at a launch pad about 2 miles away from ULA's launch pad. And they start putting their rocket together. ULA makes all these objections. If their silly little rocket blows up, it'll damage our launch pad. We can't have that. So they get booted out of Vandenberg, and they end up finding the only other place that they can launch from is a tiny little island that used to be used for nuclear tests in the middle of the Pacific, called Kwajalein Atoll. And so they set up from there.
Where's that located?
Middle of the Pacific, so almost right on the equator. And the handy thing about it being on the equator is that when you're launching a rocket, you can use the Earth's spin to help you get into orbit.
Nice.
Because orbit is just a matter of getting above the atmosphere and then going sideways fast enough that when you fall back down, the Earth is actually curved away under you, so you fall around the Earth. And so using that equatorial spin to launch there means you can use less fuel to do it. So it was handy in that sense. However, Kwajalein Atoll is extremely humid, and it's basically a strip of sand about 200 meters long and saltwater ocean all around. And salt water and humidity don't react well with nuts and bolts and rocket parts. So there was a lot of corrosion issues and stuff. And so the first 3 flights of the Falcon 1 rocket failed. One of them, the payload actually, the rocket blew up in flight, and then the payload in the nose cone section continued upwards and then fell right back down and landed inside its own shipping container on the island. So yeah, kind of ironic. The company was burning through that cash that Musk had since the ousting from PayPal, and they had enough left for, well, initially they thought they had enough for 3 flights. They managed to scrounge together a little bit more. I think Musk had to mortgage his house. He was, or sell his house. He was sleeping on friends' couches at this point because it was when the financial crash happened. Tesla was also on the rocks. This was 2008 at this point, and so they were really running on fumes. But they had enough of the 4th rocket complete and enough cash to get it on the pad that they could make another attempt. And I think it was only like a month later, which in spaceflight terms is pretty incredibly fast, especially for a new company, that they launched the 4th flight. And they didn't, at this point, they had destroyed 3 customers' payloads because of the failed launches prior to that. So nobody had the confidence to actually fly in them. So they just had a mass simulator, a heavy piece of metal on top of the rocket to demonstrate that they could launch something to orbit.
Sorry, Brendan. The first 3, did they actually have payload in them that was going somewhere to the ISS, or was it just like experimental with, I don't know, cargo that's there just to fill up the weight?
No, the first 3 were paying customers. They had satellites on board. There were at least one of them had payloads from, I forget the name of the company, but it was a company that offered burials in space, and so your loved one would be one would be cremated, and then some portion of their ashes would be loaded into a very small little capsule and put aboard this rocket. And in fact,
very interesting.
Yeah, one of them carried the ashes of, I think it was either Gene Roddenberry or James Doohan, who would be, Gene Roddenberry was the creator of Star Trek. James Doohan played Scotty on Star Trek. And so one of them did. Now, they technically got to space because after the rocket exploded, the payload went up above the atmosphere and then fell down again. But yeah, so it's, anyway, they did have paying customers on those flights.
Mm-hmm.
So Musk's original cash investment plus the payment that those customers made, minus of course the payout that they had to make after they lost the payloads, left them with enough money to do flight number 4. But this one was one with a mass simulator, basically a fake satellite on top. And that 3rd failure that had happened was a single line of code that needed to be changed. The rocket needed to wait just a few more seconds before it activated the 2nd stage engine after separating from the lower part of the rocket, because the lower part had collided with the 2nd part, or the 2nd stage, and damaged the engine prior to activation of it. And then
that made it explode.
Yeah, exactly. So they added a few seconds to the counter, launched it, and the fourth flight succeeded. They got the demonstration article into orbit. And that saved the company because they managed to get a fifth and sixth flight booked on the Falcon 1. And that demonstrating their capabilities meant that NASA was now willing to invest more money in them. So they were given the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services contract on foot of that, which was worth $1.6 billion to them.
Wow.
So that funded the development of everything that they went on to do.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point in time, they had this small rocket, but they had founded the company with the ambition. I should have said as well that the ambition originally being to put a little greenhouse on Mars, that quickly expanded because I think Musk realized that simply inspiring the public to inflate NASA's budget wasn't going to work if everybody in the space industry was massively inflating their profit margins by charging enormous amounts for these rockets that actually didn't cost that much to build. Mm-hmm. So the aim being the aim of the company then changed to do it all themselves, to get a colony started on Mars.
Mm-hmm. And tell me, Brendan. A lot of people know about Elon Musk's top secret master plan.
Yes.
Did that involve the plan for SpaceX as well, or was that just for Tesla?
So he has two. He has a master plan for Tesla, as a master plan for SpaceX. The master plan for SpaceX was more fluid, and there wasn't a direct blog post, but the basic ingredients of it have been sort of hinted at and discussed in various forms down through the years. So the master plan for SpaceX was a small rocket to get the company rolling, and then attempt to get a solid contract, such as the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services contract, or COTS for short. And that would run on a larger rocket. And then using that knowledge, they would build a monster rocket. And so that's where they then would graduate to sending large numbers of people to Mars at that
point. Something like a bus.
Yeah, or even a ferry.
Nice.
A good analogy there. So so at that point they had the money, they had the success, and they upped their game. They designed a rocket with 9 of the same engines that the Falcon 1 had, and so naturally they called it Falcon 9.
Falcon 9.
Yes. And it's a great name as well. And Falcon, of course, is a Star Wars reference. It's Millennium Falcon. And they were talking about, of course, sending people up on this as well, and doing it for cheaper than had ever been done before. And people said to Musk, "You're crazy. You've been puffing the magic dragon if you think that this is gonna work."
On Joe Rogan's podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm sure that Elon was used to hearing that sentence being said to him, like, "You're crazy, you can't do it." I love, there was one speech of Jordan Peterson where he talks about like efficiency of people, and should people be paid by their efficiency, right? And then he goes like, and then you have an example of Elon Musk, and then he just like starts listing the things that were thought of being impossible, and he did them anyway. And he's like, so what do you do with a person like that?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to estimate the value of somebody who really doesn't seem to understand doubt or fear of failure. I mean, when people ask him, "Did you think you were going to fail?" he will say, "Yeah, SpaceX I thought had a 90% chance of failure, but nobody else was doing it, so I thought I should do it." And he talks about a chance of failure and all of that, but he doesn't seem to feel the fear, that physical force that people feel stopping them from attempting something, or that.
I think he just has a mindset of like, all right, even if all of this like breaks down and goes to zero, I think he would just start again. Like he would probably go into something like financial again, and just raise the capital and just try SpaceX too, just like restarting the company with the same aim, just like 5 years later,
Yeah, I think so. He's said before that he'll never quit doing this. and that there was a great quote: "As God is my bloody witness, uh, we'll get this done," or something like that. And he's on record multiple times being an atheist, but I think like
He said it
the
just to emphasize it. Yeah.
exactly, yeah, yeah. So Falcon 9. They demonstrated the effectiveness of Falcon 9 starting in 2010. They launched what they call a boilerplate of the capsule, which they called Dragon because of Magic Dragon.
Hmm.
Initially, they were going to call it Magic Dragon. They shortened it because Dragon sounds a lot cooler. And so that's where that comes from. I mean, you think all the 420 stuff is recent? No, he's been involved in the Magic Dragon since way back when. Um, and that demonstrated the capability that they were able to launch a capsule into orbit. Then in 2012, they sent it to the space station, and that demonstrated that they could do that. So NASA was paying them then to basically bus cargo up to the space station. They have done, I think, 20 flights at this point of cargo to the space station over the last 20 years, or 10 years rather, um, or 8 years, in fact, since they started. And in that time, they then redesigned that capsule with people in mind. And Dragon version 2, Dragon 2, Crew Dragon, it's gone through a number of names. If they're bad at one thing, it's consistent naming schemes. It has just been all over the place. Falcon 9 has gone through many revisions, and you'd think like Falcon 9 and then Falcon 9 version 1.1. Okay, that's the naming scheme. It'd be version 1.2, 1.3. No, next one was called Falcon 9 Full Thrust. And then there was Falcon 9R. And then Falcon 9. It just, they stopped renaming it at one point. At some point, they just said, yeah, it's just Falcon 9. We're just going to keep changing it. And then that developed into their monster rocket. And from fairly early on, they've been talking about the monster rocket, calling it the MCT, the Mars Colonial Transporter. And it is 3 times as wide, at least, as the Falcon 9.
Wow.
At least back in the day, on paper, it was varying in terms of size. But the aim was to be able to transport 100 people at a time to Mars. And
Brendan, they're famous
yeah,
for launching one car into space, one Tesla car into space. With which model was that, and how big was that rocket?
right. Okay. So yeah. So that was a Tesla Roadster that belonged to Musk. They stuck it on top of a variant of the Falcon 9 called the Falcon
Hmm.
Heavy, and that is 3 Falcon 9s stuck together at the
Mm.
base. And so that is for launching much larger payloads. It can launch payload capacity of about 50 tons versus about 20 tons on the regular Falcon 9.
Wow. Well,
55, I think.
that's already massive. Like,
Yeah.
so from the in the last like 10 years, no, it's a bit more. Yeah, you said
Uh,
2008 when
2000,
you started, kind of like
that's right. Yeah, 2008. So 12 years.
12 years. They increased the payload by multiple times, right?
Yeah, yeah. As Musk, one of his favorite phrases is an order of magnitude. I
Hmm.
think this is like 2 orders of magnitude. Yeah, from 500 kilograms to over 50 tons. So it's 5,000. Yeah. So yeah, an order of magnitude anyway. Um, and yeah, Falcon Heavy was something to behold. I mean, this was literally 3 Falcon 9s strapped together, launching 27 Merlin engines on the bottom of that thing, firing up all at once. The only rocket that had ever had that many engines on it was the Soviet moon rocket. And
Hmm.
not many people remember the Soviet moon rocket because it didn't get very far. It had 31 engines on the bottom of it, and it blew up all 4 times they launched it. um, yeah, but modern technology enabled them to smooth out any of the issues that rocket from the 60s had encountered. And yeah, Falcon Heavy was just glorious, but kind of a developmental dead end because the the evolutionary path that they were following at that point has early on they thought, okay, we'll have our Falcon 1, we'll go Falcon 9, and then we'll go a bigger rocket and we'll stick 3 of them together to send stuff to Mars and
Mm-hmm.
keep doing it on that path. But as they were kind of working out the ins and outs of the physics involved and everything, it started to favor a single stick rocket, just making it enormous.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I was saying, they were talking about the MCT, this would be the Mars Colonial Transport, which I thought was a great name. And then in 2016, Musk had been talking about how he wasn't fond of MCT, he didn't like it starting with M. And they did a press conference where they unveiled what they then called the ITS, the Interplanetary Transport System.
Mm.
And this was to be a 12-meter wide rocket. So if you can think of like from where you're sitting at the moment, imagine 12 meters away, that's the other side of the rocket, and 120 meters tall, so 10 times that height.
That's like a cathedral tall. It's like a
Yeah,
really tall building. Yeah.
it's like what would that be? It's like 40 stories maybe. So skyscraper sized rocket.
Yeah. Massive.
And yeah, it's about that, isn't it? And so that was the plan in 2016. It was going to be made from carbon fiber, and they were sort of there was a slide in that presentation where it was like build rocket question mark profit and then Mars, and so there was something missing from that plan. And as they sort of refined that plan, the next year they came out with a refined version of the same design, but it was now slimmed down a little bit, 9 meters wide, and it has held at that diameter since. And the design, as in the physical shape, has changed a few times as they worked out the aerodynamics of like how they're actually going to send this thing up and have it come back to Earth.
Mm-hmm.
But the key aspect of this is that if you think about any rocket that's ever flown, or indeed any sort of popular image of rockets, maybe prior to a couple of years ago now because of the influence of SpaceX, you think of that footage of the Apollo rockets launching. And they always have that shot where you see the Earth in the background as a piece of the rocket falls away and there's flames sort of coming off it.
Yeah.
And that goes away. I never thought about what happened to those pieces of the rocket. But throughout history, until SpaceX, those bits of rockets have always just fallen into the ocean and smashed. And the reason that they separate those parts is because in order to get through the atmosphere, you need to push a lot harder. Once you're above the atmosphere, you don't need all those engines. You don't need the now empty fuel tanks that have been pushing their fuel out of those engines. So they separate those heavy fuel tanks and engines and let them fall back. Mm-hmm. And then the upper part of the rocket has a much more efficient setup of usually a single engine and a smaller fuel tank. And that'll
because it doesn't need that much push.
Exactly, yeah. Mm-hmm. There isn't the resistance anymore once you're in space. There's no air resistance.
Yeah.
So all you're doing is kind of throwing yourself at your destination. Mm-hmm. But those pieces of the rocket that fall down and hit the ocean, they're super expensive.
Yeah.
They are crazy expensive, like hundreds of millions of dollars. So SpaceX's big innovation and the thing that's been so, I think really they reached orbit. That's been done before. They got a capsule to the space station. That's been done before. But the thing that SpaceX did that really made people sit up and go, whoa, the original invention of SpaceX is they landed those pieces of the rocket. It falls back down through the atmosphere and then it lights up its engine and it lands vertically. Mm-hmm. And it's the most stunning thing to see this.
Yeah. It spreads out the small wings on the side that kind of balance it out, and the engine, and it's like you're dropping your pen on the table. It's just like straight down, like brilliant.
Yeah, those little grid fins that it pops out. I loved it in one of the webcasts. The host was like, "It's going to pop out some grid fins now. They're like little T-Rex arms." And proportionally, they are like they're tiny little things up the top. But they have this lattice of wings, basically, and that steers the rocket. Mm-hmm. And it was really magic. I mean, I've watched so many webcasts. I'm kind of superstitious that if I don't watch a SpaceX webcast, something will go wrong. I have no proof for that, but it's kind of a thing. And early on they were making the grid fins out of aluminium, and you could actually see, because the camera on the first stage rocket, as it fell into the atmosphere, you could see a very clear illustration of why this is difficult to do and why people thought this was impossible, because you could watch those grid fins start to melt from the
Hmm.
atmospheric
Yeah,
heating.
yeah, yeah.
And so they've switched now to forged titanium grid fins, which don't melt. And they are now sitting pretty at, I think it's 63 or 64 successful landings since the first one at the end of 2015.
Wow.
December 21st, 2015 at 4:30 a.m. In the morning Ireland time. I was sitting at my computer desk watching the first time they successfully landed a rocket, and it landed right back at Cape Canaveral on a disused launch pad
Hmm.
that they had bulldozed. And my God,
What was the
that
feeling?
was it was the future begins today. That was the feeling. It was this is how Star Trek starts, like how that future of a utopian spacefaring civilization gets going. This was a remarkable feat of engineering and of ambition and audacity. To see this, I think it's same height as like a 10-story building. This piece of the rocket just fall out of the sky, light up its engine, and land on a dime. And I cheered. I was weeping. I was laughing. I was dancing. I nearly passed out just from the rush of blood to the head. I went faint and I fell back into my chair. I was absolutely ecstatic because this is it. This is reality. It's going to happen, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, it's so incredible. And I always get a little echo of that every time I watch a landing now.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
diminished because they've done it 60, nearly 65
Yeah,
times.
yeah.
It's like kind of getting old hat now. But you have to kind of pinch yourself and remember nobody else is doing this. No other rocket launch in the world, with the exception of some tourist flights that haven't even had people on them yet from another company called Blue Origin, which is actually older than SpaceX, has had some of the same ideas as SpaceX, but has been much slower to execute.
Hmm.
That's the one run by Jeff Bezos, or as Elon Musk calls him, Jeff who? So
The level of disrespect.
I know.
Let's go there for a second. Who are the main SpaceX is not the only company that's trying to bring us into space.
Yeah.
What are the main competitors? Can you go a little bit into that? What are the other companies? What are they doing? And can you kind of compare them a little bit to SpaceX? Are they keeping up? Are they doing something similar? And what's their story?
Well, keeping up, in short, no. No, nobody is keeping up. So I mentioned ULA earlier on. They're the sort of the old guard. Um, they are still launching the same rockets that they were launching back in 2002 when they booted
Mhm.
SpaceX out of
So
Vandenberg.
that was Boeing, and the second company was
Lockheed Martin.
Lockheed Martin. Hmm.
Yeah, so those are real old guard space companies. They've been around since well before the Apollo era, and they both worked on Apollo space shuttle and everything in between.
Hmm.
All of the Voyager space probes, any basically every space probe that was launched from America has been launched on either a Lockheed Martin or a Boeing rocket.
Okay.
Mainly because the companies kept on merging all the way through the years. But the Titan, the Atlas, the Delta rockets, all of those are theirs. Um, and then you have Blue Origin, which is Jeff Bezos' company, founded the year before SpaceX, has, I think, like maybe 12 launches of a rocket that can't reach orbit under its belt.
Mm.
Now they have ambitions to do a rocket called New Glenn, which may be close to completion. It's hard to tell because they're very secretive. At one point, they would do launches of their space tourism rocket called the New Shepard, and they wouldn't tell anybody about it until after the launch. They'd be like,
Mm.
"Oh, Blue Origin, we launched yesterday. Here's the video." And it was like, why are you not hyping this up more? It's
Yeah.
really cool stuff that you're doing. But yeah, so New Glenn is under construction at the moment. That will be a 7-meter wide rocket. very similar to the Falcon 9, except that it runs on methane and is a bit bigger. So that will be exciting to see if and when it ever appears. They have a big factory at Cape Canaveral, and they've shown pictures of the fairing and a few other things. Fairing being the protective cover on the payload, but it's not exciting following Blue Origin because they don't share anything. It's all very secretive. Who else then? I don't think you could call them competitors as such, but there are other companies in the field who are exciting. There's Virgin have actually two companies. There's Virgin Galactic, which is another space tourism effort, and that's using a kind of a novel system where they launch an aircraft and then launch a aircraft / rocket from under that aircraft. And that will give you about 6 minutes of weightlessness for a crew cabin capable of holding, I think, 6 people. And so that's purely a tourism thing at the moment. It's $200,000 per ticket on this. They have demonstrated its capability about twice, I think, in actual suborbital flights. And technically, they don't actually get to space. They get to like 99 kilometers above the surface, and the line for space is 100 kilometers. So they're within touching distance, and then they fall back down. But during the fall, you have zero gravity. And if you look at the windows, it looks quite like space because there's basically no atmosphere around you.
Yeah.
And that could be, well, no, that would be amazing. It'd be incredible fun. But it's not getting you to space. Now, I think they have ambitions to do point-to-point transport on Earth, which if you launch anything suborbitally, from one continent to another, it is technically an intercontinental ballistic missile.
Okay.
You just don't have to put nuclear weapons on it. You can put people in it and have it land instead of impact. And actually, that's one of the things that SpaceX is aiming to do.
Will people make jokes and say, like, I traveled by nuke?
Maybe. ICBM for sure. Yeah. Today I was an ICBM. But there's other companies in the field. There's like a sort of a mini SpaceX who are a lot of fun, called Rocket Lab. They're run by a dude named Peter Beck. They are a New Zealand, of all places, company. And they have this little carbon fiber rocket that has 9 engines on the bottom. It's very Falcon 9-y in that it uses the same fuel. It looks very similar when it flies, but it's black, except when it ices up, it gets white on it. But it's incredible fun. And Peter Beck famously said that reusability wasn't a priority for them, because their priority was manufacturing very cheaply, launching very cheaply. You can launch a payload on a Rocket Lab Electron rocket, as they call it, because it has electric pumps in the rocket engines. You can launch a payload on that for $5 million, which is about 1/10 the price of the Falcon 9, which is about 1/4 the price of the nearest competitor. And so Rocket Lab are a small rocket. They're about Falcon 1 size, so they're not directly competing with SpaceX. So it's a nice kind of synergy there. And Peter Beck said, reuse isn't a priority for us because we can do it cheaply enough, and reuse is really, really difficult to do. If I ever reuse a rocket, I will eat my hat. And then last year he tweeted out, I'm going to have to eat a hat. Because right now they are developing the capability to reuse the rockets. I believe their last flight, they had the rocket survive all the way down to the ocean and parachute soft landing, which is great. And their aim is to catch their rockets while descending under parachute using a helicopter with a big hook.
All right.
Yeah.
Creative.
Yeah. That'll be fun to see when it happens. It should be in a matter of weeks or months, because I think their next flight is the one they intend to try it on. But that's kind of it. There are a number of other smaller companies nipping at their heels, but nobody with rockets that are actually flying. China has a couple of companies that are developing reusable rockets as well. So the idea has caught on. The spark has started to light the fire. But SpaceX are so far ahead of anybody else, and we've buried the lead at this point. We should get on to the big news. So I was talking about the MCT and the ITS, this big rocket project that they've been working on. Now, internally, before it was even called the MCT, they were talking about the BFR, which, if you remember Doom on the PC back in the 90s,
BF sword,
the BFG,
a BFG.
The big gun.
Mm-hmm.
And that middle initial you can figure out for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The BFR is what it says on the tin. It's a big rocket. And that was the internal development name. After changing it from MCT to ITS, they just decided, screw it, we can't think of a name, we'll just go with BFR. So BFR was the name of this thing from 2018 to late 2019. And yeah, and they kept having to explain that. And they were kind of going, it stands for Falcon. Yeah, big Falcon rocket. But then they were like, it's not really a Falcon. The technology is so different. So finally, they relented and put a final name on it. It is now called Starship, which is not without its problems, because to me, a starship is a ship that travels between stars. This would travel between planets at best. It's not going to go interstellar anytime soon. But in any case, it's called Starship now. And the big rocket that sits underneath the spaceship part of it is called Super Heavy. And they really kicked into high gear in the last 18 months because, like I said earlier, it was going to be made from carbon fiber. Carbon fiber is a difficult material to work with. It's super light and super strong, which is great for building a rocket, but it doesn't handle thermal fluctuations very well. So going from cold to hot. And space is cold, sunlight is hot, re-entering the atmosphere is extremely hot, especially if you're coming in at interplanetary velocities. So I said earlier that the Falcon 9 first stage, those grid fins, were melting during re-entry.
Mm-hmm.
That's re-entry from suborbital velocity. So I should quantify that. You get to orbit. To orbit the Earth, you need to be traveling sideways at 7.65 kilometers per second, nearly 8 kilometers per second. So in Ireland anyway, from one town to the next town in 2 seconds, or less. Super fast. That's why you need rockets to do it. You need to get as fast as possible. Even at the point where the first stage separates from the second stage after pushing the payload and second stage out of the atmosphere, that rocket is traveling maybe 1.5 to 2 kilometers per second. So that's the speed that the Falcon 9 first stage is re-entering. And even at that speed, the compression heating, the friction of the atmosphere is enough to melt the aluminium grid fins.
Mm-hmm.
And they were getting shredded and almost losing control of the rocket in the early days. That's why they switched to forged titanium. And entry heating of any object falling into the atmosphere increases not in proportion with the speed of the object, not at the square of the speed of the object, but cube the speed of the object. So you're traveling 4 times as fast. You're increasing your heating by a factor of, is that 64? Did I get that right?
No, if it's cubed, then it's 4 times 4, right?
So it's 4 times 4 times 4.
16 times 4, 40. Yeah, 64.
Yeah. So insanely hot is really what it is. So you're asking a material, carbon fiber, which is essentially carbon strands in an epoxy resin glue, to withstand going from potentially minus 200 degrees in the cold of space and with super chilled liquid oxygen and methane inside it, to then get exposed to 700, 800, 900 degrees Celsius on entry. So it was an extremely hard problem to solve. Now, I should note, Rocket Lab, Peter Beck, they're doing it, at least with their first stage. They're managing to get through that, which is absolutely incredible for them. But their rocket is 1.2 meters wide, and we're talking about a rocket 9 meters wide.
Yeah.
So they were tackling this problem. They thought they had it solved, but then they kind of took a step back and looked at the material science of it all. And they realized that there is another material that you can put through that kind of thermal regime and it won't be so prone to coming apart. And that is stainless steel. And that seems like really low tech compared to carbon fiber layouts. But when you realize that the thickness of carbon fiber that you need to withstand the re-entry heating is such that you're actually looking at similar weight, mass per area of hull to what a stainless steel hull would be. And stainless steel is stronger at various temperatures that it's going to be operating at, like the cryogenic fuel temperatures and the high temperatures of re-entry. And it is super cheap.
Mm-hmm.
We've
So
got
they went with
kitchen.
that.
Yeah, so they went with stainless steel. So they had been setting up a facility down in Texas, right on the border of Mexico, basically as far south in the U.S. as you can go, near Brownsville, Texas, in a place called Boca Chica. And yeah, which I think means like girl mouth or something. It's a very odd name. But they had set up a facility. They'd basically been doing very little with it, but they had been talking about building a launch pad there for years and made concept renders with like a Falcon Heavy sitting on a launch pad and stuff. But it was such a sort of marshy, sandy kind of place that they needed to compact the ground a lot. So between 2014 and 2018, there wasn't a lot happening there other than truckloads of soil coming in and rollers rolling it out. And people kind of forgotten about it. And then in the closing months of 2018, yeah, there was some strange activity there, and people were saying, what are they doing there? This water tower company had come in and was building this cylinder, and people were like, this is weird. Are they building a water tower for the launch pad? Or what? Yeah, it's definitely a water. I mean, it's a water tower company. And then others were saying, yeah, but it's 9 meters wide, and that's the diameter of the rocket they want to build. And there was so much debate and like name calling back and forth, and then a truck pulls up with a rocket engine and sticks it on the bottom of this water tower. So it's so absurd, like in the middle of basically the countryside, wilderness, with no NASA-style buildings or hangars or anything around. They had people out in the open from a water tower company welding sheets of stainless steel together to build a rocket prototype. And that became what's called Starhopper, which is a Starship prototype. And that did a hop. God, it's so hard to remember when these things happened. Oh, look, I have a cheat sheet. So Starhopper did 3 flights. Yeah, and was decommissioned in August 2019. So it did a 150-meter hop in August of 2019 and landed. And that was the first time that they used their super duper new engine, the
That
Raptor
was
engine.
the whole spray cans can fly meme.
Yes. Actually, no, spray cans can fly came later.
That was in
Starhopper.
2020.
Yes, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Starhopper was the meme for that was water towers can fly.
Well,
Because it's this squat little, like it looks like a paint tub, but it's just scaled up and on a little tripod. And that thing took flight, landed, and then in September of 2019, they basically the same people using the same construction methods built a mock-up. Well, it wasn't a mock-up. It was intended to be a flight article of Starship. And it was just this, on the one hand, beautiful, kind of squid-like, tall silver cylinder, but it also looked pretty janky, especially looking back now, because it had a very warped, undulating surface because these were water tower guys building a rocket.
Yeah.
It wasn't well finished. And SpaceX at that same time was ramping up to launching crew for the first time on the Dragon. So, as Musk had put it, then 95% of SpaceX's ability or resources were focused on getting crew to the space station safely, which is absolutely the right move to make because like that's a milestone they need. It's something that the world needed, I think, as well, because it was a very uplifting flight when they finally did it. But 5% of the company were down playing with stainless steel in Texas. And once Crew Dragon was sorted out and it has just had its final certification in the last few weeks, and they've done a demo mission with people on it a few months back, which was amazing. Doug Hurley and Bob Benkin made their way to the space station, spent a couple of months up there, came back. Everything went absolutely perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
And Crew 1 is actually going to lift off later today, if everything goes well, weather-wise, in about 10 hours from now. And that would be the first operational crew mission. There's a 4-person crew on that: Shannon Walker, Victor Glover, Mike Hopkins, and Japanese astronaut Soichi Noguchi.
Mm-hmm.
So that's brilliant. They're sending crew rotations up to the space station for far cheaper than the Russians have been doing it for the last 15 years at this point. Well, no, 9 years since the shuttle was retired.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, back to Starship. So they had a minimum of resources devoted to it at that point, and they built this Mark 1 Starship. And Musk had this presentation of what the plans are going to be, standing under this enormous 50-meter tall, 9-meter wide, beautiful question mark beast of a thing. And sure enough, within a few days, they had taken the nose cone off it again, because they didn't need the nose cone on it for testing, and sent it off to their test pad, which is just down the road. And at this point, there was like a tent at the construction facility and a frame at the pad, which is what they stood this thing on. But on pretty much untreated ground, aside from the soil compacting they've been doing for the last few years, pretty much out in the wilderness. And they filled this thing up with propellant, and it burst. It collapsed on them. So, but very quickly, they had another one built, serial number 1, as they started calling it. That one also burst after being filled. They built some test tanks to test their welding methods. They were building more tents, more buildings, more hangars. Serial number 2 was a test tank. Serial number 3 was another spray can. It burst. Oh, it did. No, it didn't do any test firings of the Raptor engines. Serial number 4 did a successful static fire, which is where they hold the rocket down, light the engine up, and it worked great. And in May 2020, this year, it did that. And then a few seconds later, they tested the disconnect systems that are needed to allow it to launch. So they disconnect all of the plumbing and everything that's been fueling it up. Mm-hmm. And something happened with the disconnection that caused a spark, and the rocket basically went nuclear. If you look up serial number 4 explosion on YouTube, it's some beautiful footage. Because the thing about it is that they're doing this out in the open, welding stainless steel together in the middle of the Texas countryside. So locals and entrepreneurial people from around the area came along and set up webcams. And there are people, there's a cottage industry of tank watchers down in Texas. They're just watching these tanks being assembled, live streaming it 24/7, and they caught this enormous explosion because it was beautiful, big shockwave and everything. But undaunted,
all the engineers are now shedding tears, being like, they're laughing at that.
Yeah, exactly. But down the road, serial number 5 and 6 were already being built. They have ramped up production so fast. This was back in May, right? What month is it now? It's November. May, June, July, August, November. That's what, 5 months?
Yeah.
They're up to serial number 14 now. They have built so many of them. Serial number 8 is sitting on the pad now. It has the full nose cone. It has all the full plumbing. It has 3 Raptor engines on the bottom of it. And it is slated to do a 15-kilometer flight. Mm-hmm. I skipped over 2 important milestones there. Serial number 5 and 6 were the flying spray cans, as you eloquently put it. They did 150-meter hops, I think only like 2 or 3 weeks apart. Let me check my cheat sheet. 30th of July, 23rd. Okay, so a month apart. Just under a month apart. And that was awesome. The weird thing about that as well is that because they were aiming to put 3 engines on the bottom of it, the mounts for the engines are offset from the center of the vehicle. And for both of those 150-meter hops, they put one engine on it, which meant it was offset. So when it takes off, it leans over and looks really wrong as it flies. It looks super janky. But they
Then the stabilizers on the side are kind of spraying it out on each side to kind of like
exactly,
keep it
yeah.
straight.
The thrusters,
Yeah,
you get these little puffs all the time. But I mean, serial number 5 took flight, went over it, landed. No significant problems. There was a minor fire in the engine bay at the end of it, and it kind of crushed its landing legs because of the off-center landing. But it's still standing today. It may do further test flights, although that's looking less likely because they're building new ones so fast and they're improving with every one that they build. Serial number 8 is sitting on the test stand right now. It has done 2 or 3 static fires, 3 static fires of various numbers of engines. It looks beautiful. I mean, it's a similar shape to Mark 1. It's got that squid-like appearance, but it is smooth. There's none of that janky look to it. It looks like a spaceship now.
Yeah.
And in a static fire the other day, it had a small problem. I was watching live, and and by the way, it sounds super nerdy and anorak to be sitting there watching people assembling a tank in Texas. But at that point, there were about 30,000 people watching this live stream. That's how excited people are about this. This is a ship that's going to take people back to the moon, set up a moon base, set up a Mars city. 30,000 people watching this thing do a test of its engines. And so it did a static fire, somewhat unexpectedly, because SpaceX had only said they were going to do a wet dress rehearsal, which means fueling it up and emptying it again. And 30,000 people were willing to watch that. It's like watching paint dry. And it did this static fire, and then after the fire, after the engine test, it suddenly started to leak glowing orange drips and sparks. It had melted some internal part of its engine and killed the pneumatic control system for all of the valves on the whole vehicle. And I mentioned before that it's got super cooled, super chilled propellant on board. That's liquid oxygen and liquid methane. And those are around the minus 170 degree mark, I think. So ambient heat will boil those. And when you boil something inside a sealed container, the pressure will increase. And if you can't use your pneumatic systems to open the valves, that's a bad day. Yeah. So you're going to burst something. But serial number 8 actually survived because they designed in a weak point in the tank, which popped, let the pressure out.
Oh, nice.
Everything was all right. So it's still standing, and they're just doing some repairs on it. And hopefully soon they're going to do that 15-kilometer flight. It feels like it's been a week away for about 6 weeks at this point.
All right. I saw a picture recently on Twitter. I think it was Elon that posted it with a completely finished rocket there, and the picture was so beautiful. What I saw on the rocket was NASA and SpaceX. What role does NASA play in all of this? Like, I know that we mentioned in the last episode that the dinner with NASA that our company had, and where the HR person spoke about the mission and how they're recruiting and all of that. And she mentioned that they're actually working together with SpaceX, and that some of their senior engineers went over to SpaceX to kind of teach them how they did the rockets before, and they're sharing technology. They're currently launching cargo, and what else are they doing for NASA?
So the picture you refer to was the Crew 1 Dragon that I was talking about a few minutes ago. The Crew 1 spacecraft stacked on top of the Falcon 9 at historic launch pad 39A. You always have to say historic before that because that's where Apollo 11 took off from. It's where most of the shuttle missions took off from. It's an absolutely amazing place. It's hallowed ground for space nerds. And it is a SpaceX pad now. They have a 40-year lease on it starting, I think, 2011 or sometime. So what's NASA's relationship with SpaceX? They are a customer. They are a very helpful customer and a collaborative partner in all of the developments, but they have been a customer since the beginning. The COTS contract that I mentioned that saved SpaceX and kickstarted the development of Falcon 9, that was a contract for services to be provided. It was a delivery contract of cargo to the space station. The commercial crew contract, which is what Bob and Doug launched on the demonstration mission 2 flight a few months back, and is what the Crew 1 mission is part of. That's another contract for services rendered. It's a taxi agreement basically.
Mm-hmm.
SpaceX designed, developed, and provides a spacecraft capable of flying crew, and NASA pays them for it. So NASA astronauts are going to fly, and NASA partner astronauts like Soichi Noguchi from the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency, JAXA, they're going to fly to space on SpaceX hardware. But it's like buying a truck from Mercedes-Benz. You know, it's in fact it's more like renting a truck from Mercedes-Benz because it's still SpaceX property.
Yeah.
And this is a change in how NASA operates, because NASA used to contract companies like Boeing and Lockheed Martin and Rockwell and all sorts of other companies, often contracting a dozen different companies to build one rocket. And NASA would control the design and the overall integration of that rocket.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that those contracts worked were kind of like, we understand that this is a difficult process to go through. Developing spaceflight hardware is inherently, it's literally rocket science. So we understand that there are going to be delays, and whatever operational costs you need to cover, we will cover for you, which is great until you flip that around and realize that it's basically a license to delay, and get paid for it. And so what has crept in, and the reason that Musk faced all these difficulties in getting a rocket in the early days, is a tendency to overquote at the start and then under deliver and delay and continue to get the cash for it. So some companies are really taking the mick with that, and because of SpaceX's efficiencies, it's kind of woken NASA up to this, and NASA is now contracting in a different way. They're saying, you do all the design work, you do all the integration work, we'll certify it, and if we're not happy, we're not going to fly on it, and we'll pay you a fixed price for that. And so it is now encouraging efficiency and just a better overall mindset for the contractors.
I have a follow-up question with that. So as efficiency is increasing and we're getting more and more rockets up and down from Earth and back, to the person listening to this, it seems so far away, like 5 or 6 astronauts are going there. It's like rockets somewhere in the desert there. What's like, there's this famous question, like, what's in it for me? Like, what will the, like, I don't want to say small person, but like the regular public get out of these rockets flying into space continuously more and more? How will we profit from that? What are some of the benefits that you can see for us?
Yeah. So I think it was a study that was done that showed that every dollar invested into the space industry so far has yielded about $7 of economic value.
Wow.
And that's in a lot of cases, that's unforeseen benefits. I mean, there's the obvious stuff like satellite communications, the ability to see the Earth from orbit gives you information on crop data, as well as national security information, just spy satellites, in other words. You also have kickback technologies like the boom in computer processors from starting in the 60s and going through the 70s. That was sort of kickstarted by the Apollo missions. You have other little kickbacks like, I mean, people think of Tang, the orange drink in the US. Velcro, I don't know if that really is a kickback from the space industry, but what we're looking at happening in the future, when people go to Mars, they're not just going to land there and just live there as it is. They want to turn that planet into a livable place. And that process is called terraforming, making it more Earth-like. That involves a lot of large-scale environmental change. And that's something that we've kind of gotten good at in a bad way over the course of the Industrial Revolution. So changing a planet from a bad place to live to a good place to live is going to be a very illuminating development process. And it's going to have kickbacks for how we repair Earth's climate and environment. Um, so that's the sort of the long-term benefit for it. Short-term, uh, getting cheaper access to space, getting equipment up there, large-scale equipment in these very big rockets, uh, and then having an extremely economic way to get stuff back from space as well, because part of the whole reusability thing is that the entire rocket is going to come back. So you can put stuff in that rocket and bring it back. So we can get space manufacturing done, which means manufacturing stuff in zero G. If it's any kind of complex crystalline structure, medical drugs and stuff like that, you can grow these things in perfect form in zero gravity. Whereas under the force of gravity, the crystalline structures tend to break down. So you get much more effective drugs, much more efficient circuitry. And then going beyond that, once we're able to get out of Earth orbit, there are riches beyond our wildest dreams in the asteroid belt.
Mm-hmm.
All of the gold that Uncle Gold, all of the gold that humanity has access to has been deposited on the Earth after the formation of the Earth by asteroid and comet impacts. And the reason for that is that when the Earth was forming, it was a big ball of molten rock, as we all know, and settlement occurred. So heavier stuff would tend to sink, and you have layers and layers of progressively heavier elements. And at some point in that sort of slice through the Earth, very, very deep down, there is a layer of gold and lots of other valuable minerals. But they are so deep down, and the matter of the Earth is in a molten state at those layers, that it's impossible for humanity to access. The pressures are too high, the temperatures are too high. But the reason the gold has been deposited by asteroid and comet impacts is because those small bodies don't have that same those same environments, those same pressures and temperatures in their formation. So, and the gravity sorting is much lower because the gravitational field of those objects is much smaller. So evenly distributed through these little rubble piles in space are lots of gold, lots of molybdenum, lots of titanium. Well, maybe not titanium, but lots of
Precious metals.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And if we have an economic way of retrieving those and using those, then that is extremely profitable. So there are numerous companies, and there has been legislation enacted in the US and in other countries to enable companies to fly out to these asteroids and mine them. And once the transportation issue is solved, that's going to be a new gold rush, a literal gold rush.
Yeah, yeah. Space gold rush.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That sounds amazing because I'm sure that will help both planets at that point.
Yeah, particularly Mars, because the big hurdle at Earth is this extremely strong gravity field that we're all used to living in.
Mm-hmm.
The gravity at Mars is 38% of Earth's gravity. So you can launch off of Mars far, far easier than you can from Earth.
Mm-hmm.
So these expeditions to the asteroid field are going to be much easier to do from Mars.
Mm-hmm. So Mars will eventually become a spaceport for Earth, right? Well, apart from being in a inhabitable planet, it'll be easier to go to other planets and stars and asteroids and all of that from there. So it makes it like a spaceport. Awesome stuff. I'm very interested actually in terraforming technologies and
Yes.
concepts, and I want to do a whole podcast on that separately, where we have enough time to go into depth with it, because that would kind of be also with the boring company because I think that's one of the first ideas that they're doing. They said that they will need a lot of time to make the surface of the planet inhabitable, but
Yeah.
it's a lot more manageable to like drill holes underground to make tunnels and then just build a base underneath, because it's basically the same as here on Earth. It will kind of be
Mhm.
work the same as underground tunnels and you know, bunkers and all of that.
Yeah.
So
The added benefit is you have radiation protection in those tunnels as well.
protection from everything, like you'll be basically isolated. It will be the same conditions as here on Earth.
Yeah. With the exception
So
of gravity, but yes.
yeah, but you know, it will be easier to manage that in an enclosed space underground. Or it's probably the same, but we'll leave that discussion for the next time. I'm looking forward to that one. We also have another few concepts that we didn't go through, like the hyperloop and Neuralink as well.
Oh yeah.
And we could do like a funny podcast, like all the Tesla extra products, like the shorts and tequila and stuff like that.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
so
Or the
we'll,
boring company's extra products like the flamethrower.
yeah, like there's so much to talk about, and we just couldn't go through everything in one podcast. So we'll leave that for the next time.
Absolutely.
As we're coming to the end of this part of the podcast, what's some of the most important things that we didn't mention about SpaceX up until now? What will be kind of like the closing points that you would like to make, Brendan?
Oh well, Starlink. Um, Starlink springs to mind immediately.
Mm-hmm.
This is the majority of the launches that SpaceX have been doing over the last year and a half now have actually not been for paying customers. They have been for themselves, and they're launching satellites called Starlink, and this is going to be well, it is a constellation. It's active now
Mm-hmm.
of I've actually lost count. I think it's close to 1,000 satellites at this point, but the complete constellation will be somewhere between 12 and 42,000 satellites. That's pretty insane because prior to Starlink, the number of active satellites in orbit of Earth was 4,000. So they've already increased the number of active satellites by 25% now, and they aim to just basically eclipse the count, at least, of satellites.
All right.
Um, and what they do is it's the internet in space. It's taking the traffic of the internet, which ordinarily, we're communicating over the internet right now. Whoever's listening to this is listening over the internet. That traffic is routed along big, thick cables that run between the continents, but they don't run directly across the ocean. They generally hug the outline of the continental shelf.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a somewhat circuitous route. But if you put a network, a web of satellites orbiting the planet that have laser links between them and then link down to the ground, you can send that signal on a much more direct route.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when people hear satellite internet, if they know anything about it, they may think, oh, but that's very low bandwidth, very long latencies. And the reason for that historically has been that these satellites are generally put at either geosynchronous or half geosynchronous orbit. These are orbits where it takes as long to circle, to fall around the planet, as it does for the planet to turn, or half
Mm-hmm.
geosynchronous takes half as long. And to get at to get that kind of resonance, you need to travel out quite a long distance. Half geosynchronous, I think, is like 12,000 kilometers. Geosynchronous is 36,000 kilometers.
Mm-hmm.
And the speed of light becomes a big issue then. Light will travel 300,000 kilometers in 1 second. 36,000 kilometers is about a tenth of a second. So you're already at 100 milliseconds ping time there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then that's one leg of the journey. Coming back, that's another 200 milliseconds. If you have processing on the satellite, that's another 10 or 15 milliseconds. If you have ground stations that need to route that through landlines to you, or landlines to the packets that it's getting from the web, it's another few hundred milliseconds. So you're looking at probably 300 milliseconds ping time on a satellite connection on a good day. Your upload speeds are tiny from those geosynchronous
Yeah. You
satellites.
probably have a bad router and an old computer, and
Yeah.
the whole interface kind of gets slower because of it.
Yeah. So how do you solve that? Well, you put them closer to the Earth. You'll need a lot more of them because the ground coverage of a satellite close to the Earth is much less than one that's further away because the
Hmm.
horizon is much closer. So Starlink, that's why there's so many Starlink satellites, thousands of them going into orbit. But being within, I think the operational height is 550 kilometers. So that is, I can't even work that out. That's like single digit milliseconds for a light speed travel time up to the satellite and back down. And then you have light speed travel through laser links between the satellites, which is inherently faster than sending an optical signal through fiber optic pathways,
Hmm.
let alone the fact that those fiber optic pathways are going on a circuitous route around the continents.
Hmm. So the satellites will kind of look at each other
Mm-hmm.
in space and convey information that way faster.
That's right, with pulses of laser light.
Hmm.
And
Cool.
so they are forming a web of laser beams.
Hmm.
Now, these aren't, laser beams that are going to slice up spacecraft or anything. And I need to emphasize that even with tens of thousands of satellites in orbit, space is big. Douglas Adams famously said at the beginning of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, you may think it's a long way down the street to the pharmacy, but that's just peanuts to space. Space is unbelievably big.
Massive. Yeah.
There is a lot of space in space. And so if you know where all these satellites are going to be, you can avoid them fairly easily. And it's well published where they are. So there isn't really a concern about that. The other concern that people will have is that it's going to clog up space with debris. But they intentionally put them in this low orbit for not only the latency reason, but also because there's atmospheric drag there that will take down malfunctioning satellites in a matter of months.
Hmm.
They'll burn up in the atmosphere. So you've got this web covering the world, providing much faster connection speed between any given locations on the planet, and very fast upload and download speeds because the signal is strong at that distance from the Earth. There are people who have already already signed up to it. It's working now. You can look up Starlink demo or Starlink test on YouTube, and you'll find people doing speed tests and testing it out in snowy conditions and so on.
Yeah.
It is using a wavelength that won't go through your roof and has trouble in snowy conditions, for example. But by trouble, I mean you're dropping from 150 megabits per second down to 25 megabits per second. It's still extremely usable.
Yeah.
So that I think was the biggest thing I left out of it.
Mm-hmm. How effective? How fast would it be in like optimum conditions? Do we have like the ideal version of it?
At the moment, optimum conditions is, I think, between 100 and 150 megabits per second. Depends how many satellites are in the sky at any given moment. But that is going to continuously improve because these are satellites that are designed to age out after maybe 5 years and ditch themselves into the atmosphere. And SpaceX is going to be continually launching new ones. They launch 60 at a time with Falcon 9. They're stacked up like trestle tables in a truck. On the Falcon 9, and it's actually beautiful to watch them deploy. And it's such a simple way of doing it. They strap them to the rocket in a big stack of 60 satellites, and when it gets to orbit, they just spin the rocket a bit and blow the strap.
And they fly out.
Yeah, like somebody throwing a deck of cards. They just all separate out.
Nice.
It's really nice.
I'll try to find the footage of that and add it here for the YouTube channel.
Absolutely, do. Yeah, Starlink deploy is your search term for that. And yeah, well, the upshot of Starlink is not only will it handle the backbone traffic of the web much faster, it's going to provide access to the entire world at very, very comfortable speeds and bandwidths in a way that has not been available prior to now. We've heard multiple ideas over the last few decades for connecting the unconnected 3 billion or 4 billion people on the planet who don't have internet access. This is the one that's actually already doing it.
Yeah. I think that'll impact the economy in a massive way. Like I know there are projects being done now in like Africa where they're trying to bring more phones and like normal internet to more people, just to kind of get them online, just for educational purposes, like because
Yeah.
people don't have access to schools, or they have to like walk for 5 hours to get to the nearest village that has an education system, or even where it's more advanced, like people have a hard time getting to a banking system, so they're cut off from the financial system. And if you basically get someone a phone in their hands, they can kind of start up their own small economic ecosphere in that aspect, and that's only possible if you have internet available. I've been looking into some cryptocurrencies that are trying to do exactly that, to kind of combine it. There's one where they're doing like, all right, you buy the phone, you have internet, you use that currency, and then it's kind of like a Fiverr option, or like Upwork or something like that, where for a cheap price they can like do some designs for you, or like just help with basic administration or stuff like that, where people find work for somewhere overseas, and it impacts the economy a lot, because the prices of work and everything are different here and there. So I think that's going to impact the economy really, really strongly. But from our perspective right now, it doesn't seem like a big push, or like a big change. I think the biggest change will be in a few years, when it actually gets going, when more people jump on it, and then it gets faster and faster.
I think one of the reasons it's not seeming like a big push right now is because the coverage is mainly in the northern hemisphere at
Okay.
the higher latitudes, basically the affluent world, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's a simple fact of physics that when you put something in orbit around the planet, if it's a net of satellites like that, they will be farther spread apart near the equator. And so as the constellation matures and you get more and more thousands of satellites up there, and by the way, Falcon 9 can launch 60 at a time, Starship can launch 240.
Mm-hmm.
So once Starship starts flying, I think Starlink will be the
It'll get
meat and
ridiculous.
potatoes for Starship.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we will get coverage at the equators, we'll get coverage over sub-Saharan Africa, South America, all these remote areas, and they're going to put some into polar orbit as well. So you'll have coverage at Antarctica, complete global internet coverage at
Nice.
on average 100 megs to begin with.
Yeah.
Probably going to scale up as they upgrade the constellation.
Yeah. Solid.
Yeah,
Solid.
yeah.
Really solid.
And like, just imagine, you give the example of Africa, um, a village with one Starlink and a Wi-Fi router and a solar panel to power it. They don't even need to have electricity.
Yeah.
It's going to be game changing for them.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Um, I think it's good to have talks like that, because it makes the future seem brighter. Because when people look at the lockdown and COVID and all of that, it seems like there's no hope, no light at the end of the tunnel. But I feel that a lot of solutions will be brought through technology, and this is just one of the companies that's trying to impact the whole world basically through technology and help people. And I feel good intent coming from them, and that's why I love talking about them. And you can just see it on Elon in interviews, that he really has a passion in helping people. Brendan, as we're coming to the end of this podcast, what are your parting thoughts for this one? I know the last one was really inspirational as well. Give us something that's more into space this time, because this time we were focused completely on SpaceX and traveling to other planets. What are your thoughts for everyone listening, to kind of part off in the positive sense?
Okay. There's a phrase, sort of almost a meme, I suppose. Uh, the sad face and the caption is "Born too late to explore the Earth, born too early to explore the universe." Well, I think that doesn't apply anymore. I think in our generation, in the next few decades, we're going to spread out across the solar system, and there are so many worlds to explore, so many new places to, new frontiers to cross, new footprints to leave. Um, it's going to be glorious. The future is bright, and we're just at that cusp.
Awesome. I personally look forward to it. I believe everyone who's interested in stuff like that is also looking forward to it, really. And I think general public will jump on it and become even more fascinated by it as soon as we get those tourism flights up and running.
Yeah.
When it gets more commercial, more affordable, then you'll actually know a person who's been to space, and
Yeah.
then you'll be like, damn, like I want to go to space, and I
Oh
think
yes.
that's the point where we get like critical mass, of people jumping on board, and I think that then it will be a lot easier to do it, because I still believe it's for some people far away. Like if I talk to my mom and dad about stuff like that, they'll be like,
Yeah.
that's science fiction. That's not real, right? So yeah, let's hope we change a few ideas and opinions on that.
Absolutely. My mom says that back when Apollo was landing on the moon, she thought that by the 1990s she'd be able to get the bus to the moon. And I hope that we don't seem that naive, when we look back in 50 years' time. But I kind of feel like it's going to happen now.
Look, even if it doesn't, I believe it will. I believe that one of us at least will go to space at one point. Hopefully both.
Yes.
I feel that it'll be worth the memes.
Yeah.
Like, oh, like, hey, Elon.
Oh yeah. We
Where
could do a whole podcast on on that guy's personality.
yeah. Elon's humor is really something out of this world.
Certainly. Yeah. He's just trying to get home.
Yeah. Help the poor guy out. Yeah, all right. Brendan, thank you again for joining the Uncle Gold podcast. This was amazing. Like, I love talking about space, and I can see and hear your passion when talking about it. I also learned a lot. Like, I'm not following all these launches regularly as you are. I kind of go for the update here and then, just to check where we are. Like, are we on Mars yet or not?
Yeah.
So
Are we on Mars.com? No.
yeah. So I learned a lot again from you, and we'll definitely have you back on. We'll go into some other topics next time, like terraforming is something super interesting for me. We'll also do a trio with Vlad where we go into some other topics as well. I think he
Excellent.
also has a few interesting ideas to bring to the table. So we'll do that one as well. And yeah, thanks to everyone who's listening to the Uncle Gold podcast. I hope you liked it. I hope you learned as much as I did. Definitely leave us some comments there to kind of tell us what were the most interesting parts, what were some of the things that we maybe missed that you would like to see in the next episode, what were the main points that you agree most, what are some of the things that you maybe don't agree with. And yeah, for everyone who doesn't like these long form podcasts, we'll do a clips version on the Uncle Gold podcast clips. Well, you'll see the main parts there. And thank you again, Brendan, for being here. And I hope you guys enjoy this podcast, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thanks, Borna. It's a pleasure.
See ya. Bye bye.
Bye.
The Uncle Gold Podcast.